Well, hello, moms and dads and caregivers. Welcome back to class. This is part 2 of our discussion of social and emotional development in infancy. I'm so happy that you brought your babies home and they're flourishing with you, but I'm also so glad to hear that some of you are interested in being foster parents and adoptive parents and caregivers and mentors. So in today's lesson, what we're going to learn about for our kids and the kids that we influence and mentor and teach and discipline, for those kids that we are role models for, we're going to learn about attachment, in particular secure attachment, and also social skills development. By the end of our time together, I hope to give us all some perspectives on quality caregiving and quality parenting. And as always, I'm so grateful for you, so thankful that you're listening, and so excited to spend this hour with you. So let's get started. So to give you some context for our training today, the main theme of all these chapters that we've been discussing, this unit on conception all the way through to age 2, one of the main themes of this unit comes down to this lecture. And that has to do with attachment and attachment theory. In order to give you some context for attachment, we have to apply it to the real world. And as a social worker and as your teacher, I want to share a little bit of my perspective on attachment so that you can learn it not just as something that is theoretical or happens to someone else, but as something that is happening all the time around you, every day, all the time. Has huge bearing and implication for the lives of the kids around you, right now, in your town, in your city, in your home. One of the things that we're going to discuss in regard to attachment is that the early experiences in life have some influence as foundational building blocks for things that happen later in life. So if we can figure out how to do a really good job with our young ones, then we can give our young ones even more capacity and potential for success when they get to be parents and they get to be lawyers and CEOs and astronauts and soccer coaches, right? When they're in charge of other people, they will be farther ahead than they would have been on account of the quality caregiving that we're able to give them at foundational early moments of life. So to give you the context of why healthy attachment is so important and how we as caregivers can be especially mindful of these early moments being enriching, being consistent, responsive, and sensitive in our care, I want to tell you the story of 2 different kids that are the same age that are born in the same hospital on the same day. In order to do this, I'm asking you to put your perspective taking and your empathy and turn it on, as you're going to try to understand their experiences and what they would feel, what they would think, and what they would perceive. From what you know of what we've been discussing in these lectures, let's put ourselves in the shoes of 2 babies, Andrew and Ben, and learn a little bit about their lives, how they're the same and how they're different. To start out this time together, I'd like you to close your eyes a little bit or just get in a comfortable position and let's do some story time with Bryn. So 2 babies are born in a hospital on the same day, baby Andrew and baby Ben. Both babies are declared to be well children. They are healthy and they enter the world with a healthy cry. Andrew has been born to a couple that have been waiting and expecting to have a baby. They've done prenatal classes. They learned a lot about caregiving before Andrew came. Their family and friends are really excited about Andrew being here. They have a crib, they have some clothes, and some of their family and friends have given them lots of gifts and different things to have Andrew's first moments be good moments. What does Andrew know about the world right now? Now, baby Ben's parents have also been looking forward to his arrival. They weren't expecting that he was going to come, but they're really, really glad to have him. They've put together a crib and they've gotten some secondhand items from family and friends or where they could get them, and they're excited to bring him home. What does baby Ben know about the world right now? Moving forward, baby Andrew enters a home where there's lots of positivity. His mom and dad smile at one another a lot. They sing songs to him. They spend time with him face to face. They read books to him before he can even hold the book. And before he even knows what items are, his mom and dad are teaching him words and teaching him objects and showing him colors. The other day it was raining and they stepped outside and got Andrew to be able to feel the rain on his skin, and he was so excited. What is Andrew learning about the world right now? Baby Ben's parents love him too. But they don't talk to one another a lot in the home because their relationship isn't so great. There's some work stuff going on for the dad and the mom in the home, and it's a little bit stressful. The finances are putting a little bit of a stress on the home. Baby Ben's mom is having a really hard time with breastfeeding and no one to help her. She's starting to get flustered and frustrated and upset. She sometimes feels like such a bad mom and kind of feels like her upbringing wasn't the best either, that she thinks sometimes it's easier if Ben just sleeps left alone, that maybe he'll do a little bit better if he can just learn independence and handle it on his own. What is baby Ben learning about the world right now? Baby Andrew is getting older, and one afternoon he's able to meet some new friends. His mom and dad have two of their friends come over to the house, and he's interacting with them and playing with them. At first, he's a little concerned about who these people are, but then he sees that they're smiling and laughing and that everyone in the home is having a good time. And the female of the pair that's over there, she's smiling and she's down there. He's on tummy time. She's down there with him, and he gets to look at her face and, wow, this is exciting. What is baby Andrew learning right now? Baby Ben's home has also had someone move in. Baby Ben's dad lost his job, and there's now a new person or a friend or a roommate in the house as well. And that person is kind of loud and kind of scary, and they smoke a lot. Sometimes baby Ben cries, and the roommate will yell up to him to just kind of be quiet. What is baby Ben learning about the world right now? Time has gone by, and he's really excited to explore. His mom and dad have already safety-proofed everything that they can, and they also just follow him around. Sometimes they save him from getting hurt, and he doesn't even realize it. He explores the backyard, he explores the living room, he's learning sights and shapes and sounds and experiences. And it's a lot of fun. It's fun to walk. It's fun to grab. It's fun to laugh. It's fun to engage with a world that is entertaining and interesting. What is baby Andrew learning about the world right now? Baby Ben's situation, unfortunately, hasn't gotten a lot better. Baby Ben's dad is home during the day, and the dad and mom fight a lot. The dad drinks when the mom goes to work, and he yells at Ben to be quiet. Baby Ben spends a good amount of his time in his crib or in his room trying to be as quiet as possible. One day, Ben was trying to learn to walk and stood up and fell down, hitting his head on the corner of the coffee table. It hurt really bad. It was scary. He didn't want to try it again. What is baby Ben in his toddling years? What is he learning about the world right now? Back at Andrew's home, toddler Andrew is now being babysat by mom and dad's best friends. He knows these people, he's seen them before, and he used to be a little bit wary of them. But in his own home environment, having seen them multiple times, it's actually pretty exciting to have these other people really want to play with you and talk with you and engage with you. They brought some new toys over, and they have smiles on their face right now. What is toddler Andrew learning about the world? Toddler Ben is having a new experience. There's a new roommate in the home, and this roommate has a toddler that's a little bit older than he is. Ben tries to play with this other toddler, but it's just very difficult. One day, as Ben is trying to play with this other boy, Ben pushes the other boy, and the other boy falls down and hurts his elbow. That boy is crying so hard, and toddler Ben's dad comes in and hits him and says no. What is toddler Ben learning about the social world right now? So as the two boys, Andrew and Ben, get older, they might be the same age, but as they enter school, let me ask you a simple question, class. What will Andrew be like in preschool? What will Ben be like in preschool? Which of the two is going to respond to discipline or to timeouts? Which of the two has better verbal skills, better emotional skills, better self-regulation skills? Which of the two boys can handle conflict and aggression? And which of the two boys feels the safest in their world? Which one of the boys is more likely to be confident in exploration? So one day, toddler Ben accidentally wanders out of the house, and Child Protective Services is called, and they look into the house, and toddler Ben's mom and dad are not doing well. There's some drug stuff, some mental health stuff, and just a lot of conflict. They're not healthy and safe right now. The home is not safe. So when they knock on the door of toddler Andrew's best friend, they want to be foster parents. So they're so excited for a boy the same age as the boy that they've been babysitting is going to come live with them right now. How exciting! So these new foster parents are so excited, and Ben walks up to them and is brought to the house, and they say, "Hey, little guy, you're safe here. Welcome to our house." Will baby Ben, with everything he's experienced, believe that he's safe now? And another question. If they compare Andrew to Ben, is their parenting of Andrew and their babysitting of Andrew going to be the same experience? All the things that work for Andrew, are they also going to work for Ben? Just because they've babysat a toddler in this age bracket, do they now know everything that they need to know about Ben and where he's come from? So in this story, we see two very different attachment stories. And we see that attachment and what the home is like has a huge bearing on development, physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development. I want you to keep these two boys in mind as we talk about attachment, attachment theory, and the implications of attachment. Now, since my example involved foster care, and I've been a social worker in Riverside County for quite some time, I figured it might be a really good time to spend a few slides talking a little bit about the reasons that kids might enter foster care as a framework for us understanding what happens when attachment is interrupted. So there's many reasons that children come into foster care. Over 80% of the removals of a child from their natural family involve some form of neglect. Neglect has to do with the basics: education, medicine, medical visits, food, shelter, warmth, emotional development, safety. Those main elements not being secure in a home. Neglect can interrupt our attachment security, and I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. Other reasons that kids might be removed from their natural family involve physical or sexual abuse, abandonment, emotional maltreatment, incapacity or unavailability of the parent, meaning something has happened to the natural family member that makes it so that it's impossible for them to care for the child, or perhaps some special medical circumstances. For example, one of my coworkers had a baby on her caseload that had 2 broken arms and a natural mother that could not get her baby to the doctor's visits because you have to change the casts a lot. You have to constantly at that age be recasting, and the baby is growing, so they need to be recasted. And those special medical circumstances meant that someone else needed to do it. Somebody else that could drive to Loma Linda University 3 times a week and do those things was available to do those things. Now, this list, of course, it's overwhelming. You see lots of things here that are, gosh, that's not what we would want for baby Ben. That's not what any baby should receive, right? And I understand that concern, definitely. We care for kids. But we need to keep in mind that not every parent has harmed or neglected or hurt their child on purpose, out of malice or out of evil. There's many reasons and many factors that make it really hard to be a good parent or be a good family member or a good protector. For some families, they haven't been raised with a lot of protection either, so they're just doing the best that they can with what they know. But other factors might involve illness or poverty or homelessness. Somebody in the home might lose a job, and we therefore have to move, and we're all stressed, and we don't have enough food in the house, and we've had to move, and we're in our car for a week, and then we're at a hotel, and it's really difficult to keep kids safe when you're constantly moving from place to place, and it's hard to keep kids healthy when you're running out of finances for food, right? A couple other things that might make it really difficult on natural family to care for their kids are things like mental health problems, substance abuse problems, or domestic violence issues. For many parents that struggle with those things, there's a reason why those things have come about. There's a story involving what that parent went through when they were a kid, right? And we all know that if you're able to address the sobriety issue or address a mental health issue, then life can improve substantially. Or a domestic violence situation. If a mom or a dad is able to get away from a chaotic, aggressive, violent household, they might be a totally different parent in a safer place. Some families don't feel like they have a lot of support from their family, or maybe their family isn't very healthy and they don't want that support because it's unhealthy. And some families just don't have communities that are able to help them with some of their needs. As we can see now with COVID, so much has changed. Some parents have lost their jobs. Some parents have had to add jobs. We have to figure out how to do daycare and schooling from home. There might be more needs than before financially, or the daycare situation might have changed, so their entire life has sort of changed as well. And there's a lot of stress when there's change in that way. So what we want to keep in mind is that if toddler Ben is in a foster home right now, then toddler Ben's parents need some help. And there's some areas in their life that we should be excited to help, because we want to put them in a healthier place to get their son back. And also, if that doesn't happen, we want to be able to have some homes that are ready that could be toddler Ben's forever home if he doesn't go back home to his natural mom and dad. Now, everything I've discussed about kids entering foster care gets us thinking about the impact of abuse. And we're also talking about it because today we're talking about attachment, or the emotional bond between a child and the caregiver. In a foster situation, you take an already difficult bonding or attachment and you rip it apart by placing this child in a new home. And even if it's safer, it's different than what toddler Ben grew up with. It's different than what he knows. The sights and the sounds and the smells and the interactions are totally different than before. How significant attachment interruptions are have to do and depend on lots of different factors. What was the abuse? What was the relationship with the abuser? What does the child have in regard to emotional, social, cognitive, and physical abilities? Does the child have any other people or experiences that are helping them cope with abuse or neglect? And what sort of support or quality caregiving are they getting before, during, and after periods of attachment difficulty or maltreatment? Now, we know from chapter 3 that trauma or difficult experiences, in particular stressful experiences, can actually diminish the dendrites that grow and the plasticity that's possible. Trauma can harm the physical structure of the brain. So if Ben has had some traumatic experiences, by the time he enters preschool or kindergarten, he could be, in his brain growth and his cognitive skills, he could be behind other kids his age that have had more normative or healthier environments. That doesn't mean that we're not able to catch Ben up. This means that we have to make up for what has not been in action. And that gets us to our topic today, which is attachment. So what is attachment? Well, attachment is the emotional and physical bond that forms between a child and a caregiver as a result of how the child gets their primary needs consistently, responsively, and sensitively met. With Andrew and Ben, we're seeing that Andrew had a very secure attachment. His caregivers were very consistent, responsive, and sensitive to his needs, whereas Ben had very different experiences, very inconsistent experiences, very insensitive experiences, and sometimes very neglectful experiences. Children that do not get sufficiently secure attachment are at serious risk of physical, cognitive, social, and emotional delays. So let's talk a little bit about the facets there of secure attachment: consistency, responsiveness, and sensitivity. Consistency has to do with, if Andrew is hungry and I feed him every time he's hungry, there's never a time or a meal, an appropriate meal time that goes by where Andrew's hunger needs are not addressed in some way. Hunger. And I'm consistently meeting those needs. Then I have been consistent. Responsive has to do with whether I have responded in kind to what Andrew actually needs. So if Andrew is crying right now, and he's crying because he has a wet diaper, if I meet his need and I respond, so I'm consistent, I'm there, I'm like, boom, you cried, I'm here. But if I have responded by giving him a bottle instead of changing his diaper, I've been consistent, but I haven't responded appropriately. So responsiveness has to do with the accurate meeting of actual needs. So if I meet the need every time, that's consistency. If I meet the need appropriately and accurately, I meet the actual need, that's responsive. And if as I'm meeting the need, I'm sensitive in my approach with Andrew, then that's sensitivity. So sensitivity would have to do with how I handle Andrew as I pick him up out of the crib, the way that I talk to him as I change his diaper. Hi, baby. Hi. Hi, Andrew. Oh, new diaper. Here we go. You know, if this is the relationship that we have, that sensitivity has to do with my tone of voice and my posture and how I'm holding him, how I've put him down on the changing table, how I put him back into bed. That is sensitivity. So those three aspects, they're not a given. And some parents could be consistent but not sensitive. They meet the need, but they're not really nice about it, right? So we're going to see the best results if we're having consistency, responsiveness, and sensitivity. And as you can imagine, as parents and caregivers to be, those three things take a lot of effort. They take a lot of emotional and physical and mental and social resources from the caregivers. And caregivers need to parent from a whole brain or integrated perspective. They need to balance emotionality with logic and planning with basic drives. They need to also be okay within their own person as they parent or caregive for the little person in their life. In psychology, we have several theorists that have had a lot to say about attachment, where it comes from, and why it's important. One of our first perspectives is the psychoanalytic perspective of Sigmund Freud. As you'll remember, Freud's perspective is that infants have a drive. They have an oral fixation. They have an oral drive in the first part of life that is focused on the mother and the breast and the person that is providing that oral satisfaction or that feeding. Within this perspective, then, the presumption is that attachment will take place by nature of a child bonding to the person that provides them food. Now, to test this idea, Harlow did a series of very controversial, highly shocking and cruel experiments in the 1960s with maternal deprivation of rhesus monkeys. Harlow's most famous experiment involved giving young rhesus monkeys a choice between two different surrogate mothers. So Harlow had these little baby monkeys right at birth, separated from their mom. They were placed in these cages with two surrogate moms, and these were inanimate objects. So one of them was like a wood ramp with wire mesh around it, and the other was this same wood ramp, but it was covered in terry cloth. It was covered in terry cloth, and it was a little bit softer to hold. That wire mesh mother had a bottle attached to it, so it was a feeding source. Whereas the terry cloth mom, that surrogate, was just soft. It didn't provide any food. Now, those baby monkeys spent a significant amount of time, significantly more time, with the terry cloth or the cloth mother than with the wire mother, despite the fact that the wire mother had the food. In other words, the monkeys really just went to the wire mother only for food, but actually preferred the comfort contact with the soft, comforting cloth mother. So this expands on Freud's idea, but also goes against that, which is attachment is so much more than who provides the food. Harlow's experiments also show us how devastating it is to have little young lives away from their moms. Many of these monkeys did not do okay when they were integrated into primate society with other little monkeys. And many of them, especially if they lived that long, did not do a very good job as a parent when they were parents to babies, being very rough on their babies and sometimes accidentally killing their babies. Some of these monkeys were disturbed and very aggressive, and some of them were very fearful and very scared all the time. What does this mean for our purposes? This means that attachment is so much more than just food. Attachment has to do with comfort and closeness and security as well. Another important name that we should remember in regard to attachment is something we talked about in part 1 of this lecture, and that is Erik Erikson. Remember, the first stage for Erik Erikson was trust versus mistrust. So for our purposes, how we can understand Erikson's influence on this narrative of attachment is that Erikson believed that trust came about not randomly, but by physical comfort and sensitive caregiving. So physical comfort by way of food and diaper changes and touch and kind words and safe experiences, low stress. Physical comfort and sensitive care, meaning sensitive tone of voice, responsiveness, accuracy of responding, consistent responding, that physical comfort and sensitive care, they together are key features in the establishment of basic trust in infancy. Around the same time as Harlow was doing his experiments at the University of Wisconsin, we have John Bowlby, who was a psychiatrist in Britain around the same time. He comes from a psychodynamic tradition as well, but also had some ethological or evolutionary perspectives of the necessity and importance of attachment in those first years of life. So Bowlby is going to be pretty influenced and pretty determined when it comes to critical and sensitive periods for attachment for later development. So Bowlby's work is really interesting because it blends different traditions that we've been talking about. He's influenced by psychoanalysis and Freud, but also the ethological perspective of Lorenz. So that's the idea of critical periods and sensitive periods and imprinting. As a psychologist, psychoanalyst, and psychiatrist, he had a vested interest in studying child development, in particular interruptions in child development. Bowlby, as a clinician, did many different studies with following certain clients and assessing what their early experiences were like. One of his studies involved following around delinquent children and assessing their childhood, early childhood, and infancy experiences. What he found that is many of the delinquent children compared to a control group, many of them had early years of maternal deprivation, where they were either kept away from their mother, like they were in an orphanage, or someone else was taking care of them, or their mother was not able to take care of them very well. In this Thieves study from 1944, he believed that the disruption in this primary relationship, this important relationship, would lead to a higher incidence of delinquency, emotional difficulties, and antisocial behavior in the future. In this study, more than half of the juvenile delinquents that were in that study, they had been separated from their mothers for longer than 6 months during the first 5 years of life. His control group, by comparison, only had 2 people that had such separation. Bowlby, like his psychodynamic counterparts, concluded that that maternal deprivation in early childhood caused significant emotional or psychological damage. And we see that Bowlby's work with clinical populations, plus his background as a psychoanalyst, has led to the formation of what we understand, broadly speaking, to be attachment theory. Bowlby is the big guy for us in regard to this concept coming into psychology and becoming something that is studied and talked about. Well, you'll see that Bowlby is going to use the word that's going to get us into secure attachment. He's going to talk about a good, healthy attachment as being a secure base for a child, a secure base from which a child can explore with confidence and security the world around them. So Bowlby's first and foremost going to believe that a child has an innate, inborn need to attach to a main attachment figure. And since Bowlby in his work was seeing that those early years really mattered to later development, he thought that a child should receive continuous care from this single most important attachment figure for approximately the first 2 years of life. He thought that the long-term consequences of depriving this caregiving relationship, especially maternal deprivation, could include things like later delinquency or reduced cognitive skill, increased aggression, increased depression, or even problems with affect and problems with empathy. So what Bowlby thought was developing in these early childhood experiences was something called an internal working model of attachment. This working model is a mental understanding and a mental representation of the caregiver and who the caregiver is, the quality or lack of quality of relationship of child to caregiver, and also the self-concept or self-value of how much the child is worth or deserving of care, depending on that relationship with the caregiver. So if I have somebody that consistently and responsively and sensitively meets my needs, I develop an internal working model of the caregiver as good, of my relationship with them as good and safe, and of myself as somebody that is valuable and loved and worthy of care. Bowlby thought that these early experiences were so important that that internal working model of attachment goes forward and followed a person into their later seasons and later relationships. Now, a contemporary and a research team member of Bowlby's by the name of Mary Ainsworth also enters into the story at this point. Mary Ainsworth is also interested in attachment, but interested in studying and assessing individual differences in levels of attachment. She's going to develop something called the strange situation. And this experiment's going to allow her to assess and classify the nature of the security of the attachment between child and caregiver. So the strange situation is known as one of the most classic studies in psychology. It's not just one study. As you remember, psychology is not just one study. There's multiple studies, and different researchers in different locations use the same methods and the same procedure to see if we're getting agreement in results, to see if there are differences in the patterns. So when I say the strange situation experiment, I don't want you to think of just one single experiment. But let's talk about what it actually is as a procedure so you can understand how we get to the different classifications of attachment. So the strange situation is an approximately 20-minute participatory observation that involves a series of introductions, separations, and reunions between a caregiver and a child, and also having an adult stranger enter the room. Children are going to be observed in this scenario, in this very strange scenario, for how often they approach the caregiver, what their affect displays are, what they do when the mother returns, what they do when the mother leaves, and essentially their behaviors and their emotions. And on the basis of coding those behaviors, children would be classified into different attachment categories. So let's walk through this strange situation. There's approximately 8 different parts to the strange situation, and each of those parts takes around 3 minutes long. In the first part, the parent and the infant are introduced to the room that they're going to be in. And the room often has plenty of toys and chairs, and it's very kid-friendly. So in the first 3 minutes, we're just watching the parent and the child interact in this new location. In the second part, the parent and infant are left alone in that room, and the child is allowed to do what they want to do. If they want to sit with mom, they can sit with mom. If they want to explore the room, they can explore the room. In the third part of the experiment, an adult stranger is going to enter the room and start talking with the parent. Then the stranger is going to approach the child or the baby, and the parent is going to leave the room. This gets us to our fourth part of the experiment, which is the first separation. So this will be the stranger and the infant in the playroom alone, and we're watching the infant's behavior. In the fifth part of the experiment, there's going to be the first reunion episode, and that's where the parent is going to go back into the room and console or greet the infant. And they're going to watch the infant for what behaviors the little baby is displaying. That's going to go on for a couple of minutes. And then in the sixth part of the experiment, there's going to be the second separation episode. And that's where the parent is going to leave and the infant will be in the room by themselves. In the seventh part of the experiment that continues this separation, the second separation episode, the stranger that was in the room before will re-enter the room and be in the room with the infant, and will watch what the infant does with the stranger. And the last part, the eighth part of this strange situation experiment procedure, is the second reunion episode. This is where the parent is going to enter the room and the stranger will leave the room. And we're going to watch how the infant behaves upon the second reunion with the parent. Ainsworth and her team coded the child's behavior every 15 seconds on different facets. One of them has to do with the amount of exploration or playing with new toys or playing and engaging with the environment that the child has throughout the scenario. The coders were also watching the child's reaction to the departure of the caregiver or their emotionality, as well as the proximity seeking and how they either sought after their caregiver or went towards her or ignored her or pushed her away upon the reunion. And also, the coders were looking for stranger anxiety or how the baby behaved when it was in the presence of a stranger. Now, on the basis of their observed behavior and how they were behaving in the strange situation, children were classified into 3 different categories, and then a 4th category was added later in the 1990s, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The 3 classifications are securely attached, insecure avoidant, and insecure resistant. And since we have an extra one that was developed a little bit later, that one is insecure disorganized. So let's talk about these different attachment classifications. So securely attached babies use the caregiver as a secure base from which to explore the environment. Secure base, we know that that's the influence of Bowlby and his work, right? They have a motivation to be near the caregiver. So they seek proximity to the caregiver. They want to be near her, but they also seek the comfort provided by her presence. And that gives them security and confidence to explore the room and engage with the room. Since the caregiver is a secure base, when the caregiver is around, the child is secure. Secure to explore, secure to say hello to the stranger or not be afraid of the stranger. And also secure enough that when the caregiver leaves, they're a little concerned and they mildly sort of protest because they would prefer for her to be there, but they don't have a huge overreaction of crying and falling on the floor and falling apart without their mom being there. When the mom re-enters, they're really happy and positive to see her again because she's the secure base. Their little base is there. It's fine. We can go back and play with our toys. Everything's fine. Over 70% of babies that are often put through this scenario are classified as securely attached. Securely attached infants are pretty easy to see, and they are what we would hope would be happening between a caregiver and a child. Your textbook will talk a little bit about the longitudinal impact of secure attachment on later outcomes. And broadly speaking, you guys, if we had to choose which classification we would have, we would absolutely choose secure attachment over the other attachment types. It's going to lead overall, more likely to lead to better outcomes for us as we grow up. A little side note here, it's not a given that just because you were secure at age 1, that you'll be securely attached at age 35. A lot could happen between 1 to 35, right? But that being said, the broad finding is that secure attachment is the optimal attachment classification. So let's talk about some of the suboptimal or the not great attachment types. So insecure avoidant babies largely avoid their caregiver in the strange situation experiment. There's not a lot of interactions with her during the scenario. The child is not distressed when she leaves the room. The stranger is kind of like a non-entity as well. It's kind of like, oh, hey, hi. They're aware of the stranger, but they're not falling on the floor and crying hysterically. And usually there's no contact or no big greeting when the mom re-enters the room. So when the mom has this reunion, she comes back. It's not like the babies rush over to her and hold her and hug her. They usually kind of avoid her, actually. So if securely attached babies have caregivers that are consistent, responsive, and sensitive, insecure avoidant babies often have caregivers that are somewhat neglectful and somewhat avoidant themselves. So oftentimes the child himself has come up with his own strategies to cope with an avoidant parent or a parent that's not very present. And many of these children have their own self-soothing strategies. They soothe themselves. They sort of sort it out and cope for themselves. And that's why you see them avoid the caregiver. They're just trying to sort of like maintain what they know. In our next category, we have insecure resistant babies. This goes by another name, which is the ambivalent attachment type. And that makes sense because these babies are super ambivalent about their caregiver. They'll sometimes cling to her and love her and want her and cry for her, and other times be pushing her away and ignoring her entirely. In the strange situation, they're not using their caregiver as a secure base to explore, so they don't show a lot of exploration behaviors. They're very clingy with the mom, and when the mom leaves, they cry loudly. They really are super distressed when the mom leaves. But what's ambivalent about their response upon her reunions is when she comes back in the room or she picks them up, they will often kick or punch or scream or pull away or try to get away from her. So they've been crying for her, but when she returns, they push her away. Many times children in the strange situation are the same way with the strangers. They don't quite know what to do with the strangers either. Like, I love you, I hate you, I need you, I don't need you. They are resistant to this secure care. So what we see here is insecure resistant babies have really inconsistent behaviors from their caregivers. Their caregivers could be in their face-to-face play, laughing, having a lot of fun sometimes, and yelling at them other times. And sometimes they get to eat on time, and sometimes they have to cry and wait for a little bit before they eat. So they have caregivers that are very inconsistent. And that inconsistency is going to hinder the responsiveness and the sensitivity, right? So the baby's behaviors, therefore, convey and display the fact that the home life itself is kind of chaotic. In the 1990s, a fourth categorization came about by Main and Solomon, and they called it insecure disorganized. And insecure disorganized babies are rare. There are not that many of them, but they really don't fit into any of the other classification types. They have more fearfulness than the other insecure types. In the strange situation, insecure disorganized children often look dazed and confused. They're fearful at times, and they often show patterns of avoidance and resistance. But the main factor of disorganized is the strong display of fear around the caregiver. In the case of insecure disorganized babies, there might be some physical abuse or abuse going on in the home, and the baby is internalizing a lot of the fearful messages from the home life situation. One of the key things that we want to walk away with here in regard to attachment is that maternal sensitivity is linked to secure attachment. And you might be asking yourself, well, why are you saying maternal? Dads and grandmas and aunties, they're caregivers too, right? Yes, that's true. Many of these studies, however, have been done between moms and babies. So we do have empirical right to say that maternal sensitivity is linked to and associated with secure attachment classification. Now, the implications about the importance of early secure attachment have a good amount of empirical support behind them. Your book talks about a really big longitudinal study by Strauff and some others in 2005, where early secure attachment in 12 and 18-month-old children in that strange situation experiment was linked with higher emotional health, better self-esteem, confidence, social skill through adolescence. Meta-analysis of a lot of attachment studies has found that indeed secure attachment is correlated with social skill later in childhood, and even that insecure attachment is correlated with higher levels of social anxiety later in childhood and adolescence. So we do have the background to say that secure attachment matters. But here's an important consideration to keep in mind. These attachment categories are not fixed in place. It's not like you forever, if you were securely attached at 1, you will be securely attached every year of your life forever and ever. That would be great if it was secure, right? But we know that sometimes families have a rough start, or sometimes families have a good start, but then dad loses his job and things get a little bit more anxious in the household. That in any person's life, there are going to be changes on the continuum of how their caregiver is able to give them consistent, responsive, and sensitive care. So for example, if I had a mom and a dad and things were going really well, both of them were consistent, responsive, and sensitive, and I was securely attached early on. But in the middle of my childhood, my parents divorced, and I went to live with my mom, and my mom had less money and more stress, and she was consistent, but not really as sensitive as she used to be. Well, my attachment could absolutely change, right? So early childhood attachment is important. It's really important. But we have to remember that a child's life continues moving forward. There are people and contexts and situations that go on throughout the developmental lifespan, and those things also have bearing on a person's classification of attachment. We can refer to that concept as the developmental cascade model, where over time, over context, and over domains, there's changes and influences upon caregiver and child and caregiver and the setting in which that relationship takes place. And we know this because we're living this. The world is complicated. It's ever changing. So culture and biology and parenting style and current events and changes in the home life and changes in the society around us are all going to influence the impact of those early life experiences, as well as influence the impact of secure attachment early on. That what happens after year 1 and 2 also play a huge role in what comes later. And this gives us hope. At the beginning of this class, I talked about baby Ben and baby Andrew. We know that baby Andrew had consistent, responsive, and sensitive caregivers. He is securely attached. But baby Ben had a mix of some seasons of his life that had avoidant caregivers where they were just ignoring him, and then a lot of ambivalent experiences with caregivers that sometimes took care of him and sometimes hurt him and screamed at him, and sometimes there were other people in the house. But you know what's really important to remember is that the experience that toddler Ben and first grader Ben and third grader Ben, those experiences can help Ben move forward. So let's imagine that toddler Ben was in foster care with this really nice family, and they were taking care of him and they were securely attached. You know what's really cool about secure attachment is that when the brain sees that there's consistency and responsiveness and sensitivity, it can start growing and making connections again. And since his brain is so little, it wants to grow, it wants to make connections. So it might not happen overnight for Ben in this foster home, but if he's with them for a while, he might start to grow and start to feel safe and start to learn new things. So maybe in a year after his parents have gone through recovery and gotten better jobs, and they've gone through some marital counseling and some parenting classes, when toddler Ben goes back to them and they're in a better space, he doesn't have to be ambivalent his whole life. He can move towards more and more secure attachment. This makes me excited because this means that what we do with one another matters. This makes me hopeful. It makes me understand that teachers and coaches and mentors and babysitters and parents and grandparents and cousins and siblings, they all matter. Supporting a child by being consistent, responsive, and sensitive is good for them, good for their physical, cognitive, social, and emotional growth. And just because Ben had a rough start, or just because Ben's parents had a rough start with him at the start, doesn't mean that it's the end of the picture, right? Speaking of that family picture, there's a concept in your chapter that's called reciprocal socialization. And this concept is important to note because the social and emotional context of a home is something that is complicated. There's multiple relationships that are interrelated. There's interacting parts and subparts to a family dynamic. You have a relationship between dad and Ben, and mom and Ben, and dad and mom. You'll have these dyads, you have different generations, you might have strangers or roommates or extended family. There's a complex, highly interactive, highly interrelated system that is functioning and socializing one another as a system. So parts of the family are going to have direct and indirect influence on the overall whole or the overall dynamic of the home. Children can socialize parents just as much as parents can socialize children. And that's why there's going to be different dynamics. If you have siblings, you know that you have different dyads between your mom's relationship with your sister and your mom's relationship with you and your relationship with your sister and how your mom parented your sister and how your mom parents you. It makes sense that because you're different people, there might be different dynamics across the board there. That's very typical. That's very human. Reciprocal socialization. The family unit is socializing and responding and building upon itself. And this is why it's so important to have positive, secure, healthy attachment in the mix. When it's part of the dynamic of a home, it can influence positively the home. But by the same breath, we know that if mom's having some mental health or sobriety issues, the chaos of that for one person is not just going to stay with just her. It's going to influence the dynamic of the home as well. So reciprocal socialization is bidirectional, transactional between the parent and child, child and parent, epigenetic in the sense that it has to do with nature, nurture, nurture, nature. It has to do with a connection in time of what's happening in the house at the time. It often involves synchronized interactions in the home and the mutual influence of what's going on across and between the members of the home at a given time. And in a healthy environment where there's reciprocal socialization, but it's healthy, there is a fair amount of scaffolding going on in the home that is healthy and progressive and moving things forward. Scaffolding in this iteration means that parents are synchronizing and timing their interactions, their joint interactions with their infants, in such a way as to maximize the fun of the experience, the instruction of the experience, or the bonding of the experience. So playing peekaboo with your infant is very much a scaffolded experience. It's not just you doing it to the child, it's the child responding, which has an impact on what you do. Peekaboo, and then the child looks for you again and you cover your face. Peekaboo, and the child laughs, and so you laugh too. And a scaffold is something that allows me to get higher and higher and higher in building that building. So scaffolding with infants means that I'm timing my interaction and I'm engaging my interaction with the child in such a way as to keep their attention, to teach them, and to connect with them. So in a positive reciprocal socialization experience, we're seeing a lot of positive scaffolding and teaching between parent and child or caregiver and child. So moms and dads, foster parents, adoptive parents, caregivers, mentors, I'm so excited to have shared these things with you today. You did a great job. I want to talk now a little bit in summary about what we can take away from these insights. Well, the first thing that we see is that we can help our child develop emotionally if we talk about emotions and we also use emotion to engage their emotional development. We use emotion during playtime. We use our face and our voice. We talk about emotion words. We say, yay, the baby's happy, happy, yay. And we also try to keep our own emotions on the positive side, because children that have positive caregivers and healthy caregivers are going to have a better emotional adjustment later. They're going to learn more about that. It puts them in a better spot. That might mean for a parent that they need to learn self-care and better boundaries and to take care of some of the stuff that maybe they've got going on. We can help our baby develop by lowering the stress level in the home and creating a dynamic in the home that allows the child to trust that they're safe. And this often means that we need to soothe our infant quickly. Infants that are soothed continually and responsively and sensitively are going to have better emotion regulation later, better coping skills, better strategies for coping, and lower levels of stress later. We're not going to let our baby just cry and cry and cry, because as they cry, their heart races and their cortisol and their stress hormones and stuff in their brain just surges, and that's not good for them. That stress response takes them away from brain growth and physical growth and cognitive growth and social and emotional focus. So we're going to soothe our infant and be consistent, responsive, and sensitive as best as we can, as much as we can. And as much as we can, we're going to have face-to-face time and lots of verbal and nonverbal face-to-face time. We're going to make facial expressions. We're going to play face-to-face. We're going to talk to the baby. We're going to use different tones of voice. We're going to use different words. We're going to do a lot of playtime and allow them to socially orient themselves. We're going to scaffold our interactions and go back and forth with the baby and help teach the baby new things and help the baby attach to us. And we're also going to be especially mindful of how temperament and environment go together in such a way as we want to create a goodness of fit between our child's temperamental proclivities and the environment in which we're placing them. We're going to use physical touch and sensitive caregiving to create safe places where children can explore and learn. We're going to do joint attention playtime where we're both focused on a task and following what's going on and teaching the child to explore and engage. We're also going to, with our children, help them learn to be autonomous and help them to reach their goals, their age-appropriate goals. So if they want to reach for the toy and the toy is safe, we don't just pick it up for them and throw it to them. We're going to have them work it out. They're going to try to stand up and get over there and get over to the toy and grab it. We're going to give them the freedom to learn and the freedom to flex that muscle of autonomy. We're also going to be good caregivers in regard to creating a safe place, a safe home that doesn't have safety hazards, that's proactive in how it protects children, and that we're using discipline in the appropriate way. Discipline means disciple or like one that teaches. So discipline is about teaching and not about punishing. So in our discipline with our children, we're going to teach them kindly and gently, but very consistently, teach them what the right response is. So we're not going to be using physical punishment with our infants. That's not good for them. And when we're not able to be around and we need someone watching Andrew and Ben, we need to find quality childcare and quality caregivers that are going to be safe places, trained, efficient, positive, safe places for our treasure, the treasure that's Andrew, the treasure that's Ben. Well, I'll tell you what another treasure is. And that other treasure is you. You are a treasure. You're doing an awesome job. I'm so proud of you. Congratulations, you've finished chapter 4 in this class. So where are we going from here? Well, in this unit, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, we've talked about conception all the way through to age 2. Your next task will be to study for and take exam 1. So I encourage you to get your study guide out, start getting these terms reviewed, listen to the lectures again, Email me if you have any questions. Reach out to your classmates, study with a classmate. Even if it's just studying over the phone or over Zoom or something, study with someone else. Teach them a concept and then have them teach you a concept. If you can teach and start talking about it, you'll know the stuff even better. And in all, you guys, I hope you have an awesome week. I'm proud of you. Happy studying. I'll catch you next time. Bye, you guys.